Hello, my beautiful bookish people. My name is Victoria Mendes. You've come to the channel The Bookish Sock. And in this video, we're gonna do my June 2020 reading wrap-up. Only I just sat down and recorded for 45 minutes without my mic pack being on. And now I'm really short-tempered about it because I'm really sad that I didn't turn my mic pack on and I'm having to redo this now. So, I lost my voice in the last video. I have since taken a few minutes to have some water and work on my voice a little bit, but it is very close to going out again. So, I think we're just going to do a very quick version of what I just did. And I'm just going to say whether I liked books or not, and give a small explanation as to why, but I'm not really going to get into it, because I got 33 books to get into for the second time around. Yay, I love that for me. The first book I read in June was Clap When You Land by Elizabeth Acevedo. It was very beautifully written in prose, but it wasn't necessarily for me. It was just kind of okay, so I gave it 3 stars. The next book I read was The Tombs of Atuan, which is the second book in the Earth-Sea cycle by Ursula K. Le Guin, which was okay. I probably won't go reread this series super often, so overall, I'm probably going to give this series 3 to 3.5 stars. It was alright. It's not my favorite. Next, I reread The TDragon Society, which is the first book in the TDragon series by Katie O'Neill. Of course, I'm going to give this 5 stars. I made a whole separate video of a read with me and talk about it, so I will link that. Go check that video out. Next, I read How Long Till Black Future Month, which is by N.K. Jemisin. I am very quickly realizing that Jemisin is probably going to be an auto-buy author for me. This is a series of short stories all combined into one book. I believe this would count as an anthology. Anyways, a lot of these short stories are precursors to her other novels or other series. It was very interesting to see how the Broken Earth trilogy started out via short story form, and how The City We Became, that series, has a short story that's in this book, and now I'm super duper excited to read The City We Became. And I now have that as an ebook copy. I don't know whether I'll get to it in July or August, but it's definitely going on my TBR very soon because of How Long Till Black Future Month. Next, I read White Rage, The Unspoken Truth of Our Racial Divide, which is a standalone book by Carol Anderson. It has a historical account with a bazillion cited resources of history of racism in America, all the way up to basically present day. It was eye-opening. It made It made me white rage, but not in the way that it's describing. This book is what has made me want to actively change what is going on, because, I mean, I've changed a lot from the town and how I was raised and stuff, and I know that I actively have to take part in improving myself, and this book makes me want to take an active role in how society evolves. If you're looking for a book that explains why the Black Lives Matter movement is so important, you need to read this book. It gives historical sources. All of the sources are cited. If you want to go into a deep dive onto any of the subjects that are covered in this book, you can, which is great. I think everybody in the United States should read that book, even though you're gonna want to throw it across the room, you're gonna want to cry, you're gonna rage. It's infuriating, and it's just given me a small sample of so many things. Alright, I'm gonna leave that there. Next, I read The Shadow Wand, which is the third book, well, the third book in the series for Black Witch Chronicles. It's actually the fifth book that has been written for the Black Witch Chronicles by Laurie Forrest. I am trash for this series. It's not particularly new or particularly good or life-changing. It is angsty, and I am living for it. And that's my thoughts on that. I gave it 4 stars because I don't see myself constantly rereading the series, but I definitely see myself revisiting it. And right now I'm just trash for this series, which isn't particularly great, but I love it, and that's just fine. Next, I reread the Caster Chronicles. It's a 4-book series by Kami Garcia and Margaret Stoll. I read this the first time in 2018 as a recommendation from a friend. It is a magical story that is set in the Deep South, I believe in South Carolina. It has mentions of Gullah Geechee culture and white culture, and the magic that kind of goes with both of those cultures. The authors don't go super in depth into the Gullah culture side of it, and after, reading more about it, I understand why they weren't the right people to tell that story, but that was the main thing that made me not like this story as much, because that side of the story was really cool, and I wish I had more of it. And then the white side of the story is more like a, oh no, it's like kind of vampire-ish, kind of witchy-ish, but none of the magic is really explained that well. It's an angsty teenage YA novel, like not even like into your 20s. It's very high school angsty, and not in the good way where the Black Witch Chronicles, I'm like totally into it now still. It's more of like Twilight levels of angst, not like modern levels of angst. So would I necessarily recommend them? If you're looking for kind of witchy stuff set in the South, then sure, go ahead and check it out. But don't expect to be blown away by it. Next, I may have an unpopular opinion. I read The Raven Cycle in full for the first time, and I'm not really into it. I read all 4 books. Books 1 and 3, I think I gave 3 stars. Books 2 and 4, I gave 2 stars. The magic system is never really explained that well. The pacing I felt was off. The setup that we have from one book to another doesn't feel like it flows that well for me. I know that a lot of people really love this series. It just wasn't really for me. And I'll let people who really enjoyed this series talk about it more. I didn't. I'm moving on. Next, I read Between the World and Me, which is by Ta-Nehisi Coates, which is classified as nonfiction and probably adult. It's written by the author, and in this case I had the audiobook for it. It's also read by the author as a story from him to his son, and he explains, his history of dealing with racism and how he wanted to be active against it, and how he used to be really aligned with the Black Panther way of thinking, and then he got to college and he starts going off about this stuff, and then his professors are like, well, but why do you really believe the things that you do, and why do you really think the way that you do? And he goes through this discovery process of how he wants to deal with things and why, and how he's seeing things as his son's growing up, where he checks himself before he talks to his son, because he goes, I'm really glad that my son's having this experience that I didn't get to have because I grew up in a different time and was treated differently. And it's really, really neat. I would highly recommend reading it. I don't see myself constantly rereading it, but I do see myself rereading this in the future, so I gave it 4 stars. Next, I read The Yellow Wallpaper, which is a standalone that was published in 1892 by Charlotte Perkins Gilman, which is a classic gothic horror story, which is very short, but it was very impactful during its time because it changed the way mental health patients were treated, because we see the slow descent into madness of this woman who is told not to do anything, not to work, just to kind of exist and do very little in this one room of this one house. And you get to see how not doing things affects your thinking. And I think anyone who wants to get into reading horror should go ahead and read this story. I don't really see myself rereading it though, so I gave it 3 stars, but it is absolutely a foundational story to horror and gothic horror. So if you're into that genre, you should definitely read it. Next, I read Dealing with Dragons, which is the first book in the Enchanted Forest Chronicles by Patricia C. Reed. This is a middle grade fantasy that I gave 5 stars. I absolutely loved it. I talked about this more in my mid-year book freakout tag. If you haven't seen that and you want to know my thoughts on this book, go ahead and check that video out. I will leave it linked. Next, I read Howl's Moving Castle, which is the first in its series by that title by Diana Wynne Jones. I mostly picked this up because I've watched and rewatched a gazillion times the movie by Studio Ghibli or Studio Ghibli. I should look up how that's actually supposed to be pronounced. Anyways, the book kind of explains some of the things that in the movie you go, why was that way? I feel like I never fully got a full explanation for that. But also, at certain points in the book and the movie, they're completely 2 different works of art. It was very interesting to see, but I think I like the movie more than I like the book, personally. I would really like to get my hands on an actual physical copy for myself, for my personal collection, so I can mark it up and do a side-by-side comparison of the book and the movie, because I think that would be really interesting. But that's something for later on down the line, I suppose. Anyways, I will be rereading it at some point, just so I can do that comparison. The next book I read was Hair Love by Matthew A. Cherry. This is a children's picture book about having really fluffy hair. Like, the girl has a fro and she's like, on these days I wear it this way to feel empowered, and on these days I wear it this way to feel empowered. And it is wonderful and cute, and really this should be in any child's collection because it's adorable, and it's about self-love and loving your hair and how wearing your hair different ways can make you feel different ways. And I love it. It's wonderful. Everyone should read this book. Next, I read books 1 through 5 of the Wayward Children series by Shannon. Wait, no, not Shannon. Shannon. I read her page because I didn't know what her preferred pronouns were. I ended up tweeting her and she was like, she, her is fine. So cool. Also responsive on Twitter, which I'm still like floored by, that I can talk to authors. For some reason, for the most part, I feel like authors are on this different level of existence, and I don't know why I think of them this way, but every time I get a reply from them on Twitter, I'm like, ugh. Does anybody else do that? Am I just weird? I mean, I know it's a very strange thing to do, but still. Anyways, I read books 1 through 5 of the Wayward Children series, which is Every Heart a Doorway, Down Among the Sticks and Bones, Beneath the Sugar Sky, In an Absent Dream, and Come Tumbling Down, which this series is a YA fantasy series. They're all fairly short books, but at the same time, like the first book I felt like had decent world development, but I felt like I needed more, and that's what I love epic fantasies, so by default, I'm going to want to know every little detail of a world, I feel like. So all of these books have me feeling like I wanted just a little bit more, and books 2 through 5 really, I think, do their shorter format stories justice, because the pacing is great. You get just enough to get by on and it work and it be really decent. And also the stories that are being told within them, even though they're somewhat fantastical, they cover very real world scenarios of how people should treat each other and why. And if you're looking for a kind of witchy series, and not even witchy, because it's this fantasy setting where these doors open to these children that are in need because they don't really fit in the real world, and you know what these worlds entail and what rules these worlds have, and why these children's are why these children are picked for these worlds. It's a really neat series that I highly recommend, and I cannot wait to get my hands on the 6th book. Next, I read Nimona, which is a graphic novel by Noelle Stevenson. This is, I believe, was this author's senior thesis in college. And if you like a good anti-hero story and you want to learn more about this shape-shifting baddie, go ahead and read it. It is fantastic. And I really wish this had been developed into a full series. The author has said that they will never touch the series again, though the character of Nimona may show up in spirit in other parts of their works. But it is really cute because it's just this shape-shifting girl finds the bad guy and is like, let's do bad guy stuff. And the bad guy's like, well, I have a code of ethics and stop it. It's really funny. And the next book I read was Lumberjanes Volume 1, Beware the Kitten Holy, which is another book by Noelle Stevenson and a bunch of other people, which is the first in the Lumberjanes series, which is a YA graphic novel again. It was cute. It's like, if you want a camp story about like girls who go on camps and like boys who go on camping trips, and it's kind of like a Girl Scout-esque kind of thing, then I think you'll like it. It's kind of neat how they handle stuff and how they get into trouble. Next, I read Avatar, The Rise of Kyoshi, which is a duology in the Kyoshi novels. This is the first book. The second book, I believe, is coming out this year, if it's not already out, which is by F.C. Yee and Michael Dante DiMartino. It is the backstory for Avatar Kyoshi, as it sounds like. And if you haven't already checked out the Avatar television series, you don't necessarily have to have already seen the series to jump into the books. I don't really think it matters which you do first, the TV series or the books, because the books explain what's going on pretty well, and if you've already seen the TV show, you're really excited to get more of the Avatar world. It was really interesting. I think I gave this book 4 or 4.5 stars because I'm not sure how often I will reread this series, because at parts of it I had a little bit of issues with pacing because part of it I just was not fully there for, but I did really appreciate getting the backstory, and overall the book was very interesting and I did thoroughly enjoy it. Next, we have 3 books that I have DNF'd, all for different reasons. We have Juliet Takes a Breath by Gabby Rivera. This is a contemporary YA that I just couldn't really get into. It just wasn't my cup of tea. Like, contemporary I kind of dip my feet into every now and again. This was just one that was not for me, and at some point I said, you know what, it's okay that I'm not enjoying the story and that I can walk away from it, and that's why I walked away from it. It's a me thing. A lot of people really enjoy the book. I don't know, Next we have Carry On, which is the first book in the Simon Snow series by Rainbow Rowell. Now, the first book that I ever read by Rainbow Rowell was Pumpkinheads, and that was before I was really looking into booktube and book Twitter, and then I found out that Rainbow Rowell was a controversial author, and especially because of Eleanor and Park. So I decided, you know what, usually when the majority of people say one thing, it's probably true, but there's also a lot of people that really like this author's work, so I'm going to go ahead and check more of it out just to see which side I fall on. I definitely fall on the Eleanor Park is probably racist, even though I haven't read it, and this book has some really problematic phrasing, because I got not even that far into the book. The main character, like, runs into another character and says, oh, you don't look like a whatever this other character's name is. You look like a stereotypical racist Indian name. And really, it isn't necessarily a racist thing to say, but it's a very strange thing to say. Like, you don't look like a this. You look like a stereotypical name inserted here. And no point around that piece did the characters talk about how that was a very strange thought process and how that's really not appropriate to tell someone you don't look like your name and then to try to replace it with a stereotypical name. And nope. I think I'm done with reading Rainbow Rowell books. Not for me. Nope. Next was The Rook, which is the first book in the Cheque Files by Daniel O'Malley, which is an adult sci-fi series. The premise is really cool because you have a badass lead female character who works for, like, this sort of spy organization, and they wake up in the middle of some really weird stuff, and they get a letter from their previous self because they either have amnesia or something's going on. I didn't get far enough into the book to find out, and I got halfway into the book before I gave up. But it's, like, really cool because they know that they're being targeted to be killed, and they are trying to figure out who's targeting them, and they're also discovering what their past life was through these series of letters that they're discovering as they read through the letters and go about their work life, which they're still in the same job they were before they forgot who they were. It's a really cool premise, but the internal monologue of the main character is absolutely atrocious, and at no point in the first 50% of the book was anything ever mentioned that the way that they were talking to themselves was atrocious and that maybe they ought to work on that. So that was a problem. And then there were also problematic phrases where it's like, what? And I can't even pull them from memory right now because I blocked it out because it was just so bad. If I went through a series of texts that I had with a friend because we were both trying to buddy read it at the time, like, I might be able to pull it, but I just don't feel like doing that. It's not worth my time. Cool premise, terrible execution, and I never plan to pick it back up again. The next book I read, because it's been on so many people's recommendation lists, is The Hate You Give, which is the first in its series by Angie Thomas, which is a contemporary YA. It predicted what is happening right now, and it is right on the nose for it. It's a very good book. I am excited to read more in this series. If you're looking for more of why the Black Lives Movement matters so much type of books, and are looking for that, absolutely pick this book up. If you're not looking for that sort of stuff, pick the book up anyways. It's really good. Next, I read The Crossroads of Twilight, which is book number 10 in the Wheel of Time by Robert Jordan. I think overall I gave it 4.5 stars because this is the first book since book 1 that I haven't enjoyed as much as books 2 through 9. The first half of the book I was kind of like, eh. And the second half of the book was the stuff that I really cared about. And of course I'm going to reread all of the books in this series so that I can experience the series over and over again. I just didn't feel like this one in particular was as strong as everything else, because with having so many characters to track in this series, it's really hard to keep up with all of their storylines, and this book in particular was going through one particular moment in time for almost all of the characters involved. And So you're hearing the same thing that's happened for everyone over and over and over again, but from their perspective. Which is interesting, but also sometimes hearing from that many characters is a bit much. And the last book that I read in June was Officer Clemens, which is a standalone by Francois S. Clemens, which is a memoir that completely changed how I look at memoirs now, and it opened me to memoirs, because previously experiencing memoirs, I've found that they are very dry and very not interesting because they are so dry. But this book, Clemens has a fantastic way of storytelling. And the way that he tells the story of his life is so intriguing. And I talk about this more in my mid-year book Freakout tag. So if you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, go check that video out. I will link it again. I think I've already linked it because of other books. I am going to stop now because that was all the books that I read in June, and that was a lot to cover. 33 books in one video is a lot to try to cover, but hopefully you found this interesting. If you've made it this far in the video, go ahead and leave me your favorite emoji in the comments down below, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!